Thanks for tuning in to the Yapping with YUCCA podcast. Before you dive in, we wanted to give a quick heads up. In this episode, we talk about hiring for Ennedith's Policy Campaign Manager role, but applications are now closed. You can still get involved with our work as a member by visiting yuccanm.org/join, and be sure to stay tuned for future opportunities to join our staff team. Thanks for tuning in.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Yapping with YUCCA podcast. My name is Kineo. I will be hosting the podcast today, but I also am a YUCCA member, and I edit the podcast as well. I use she, her pronouns. And this is the second podcast in the series of YUCCA staff highlights. Today, I'm here with Ennedith and Zoey. Welcome, guys. Could you each introduce yourself and tell us about your role at YUCCA and what day-to-day tasks look like for you?
I can go for it.
Yeah.
My name's Ennedith Lopez. I use she, her, ella pronouns, and I'm the policy campaign manager at YUCCA. I've been doing this role for the past 2 years. And usually people are like, what the heck is policy? And I'm like, oh, big question. Very important question, right? Because a lot of times people may not think so critically of the function of the government and the way it may impact our day-to-day lives. And so I think that's where policy comes in, right?
Awesome. Yeah.
Policies dictate what services people have available to them. That it also dictates, how much something might cost, what corporate players are we going to hold accountable or let slide off. Boom, boom, boom.
Ooh.
Or also, what public services are available. So in terms of like free school lunches, access to healthcare, that's what policy is. And so specifically at YUCCA, we focus on climate justice and environmental justice initiatives. So what that means is sometimes that may look like, one of the biggest things we had this past legislative session was a setback. So trying to establish a 1 mile between new oil and gas wells and schools, right? So that impact would be hopefully improving the health of children within a school facility that they're mandated to be at.
So you work on writing legislation or analyzing it and communicating it? What does that look like for you?
So it kind of depends. Sometimes within coalition spaces, we are writing legislation, we are giving feedback, we are brainstorming what's a problem that we're seeing in our communities and in what ways can we remediate or address this issue. So sometimes that comes in with like a brainstorm, like maybe this is the policy that we need in place. I don't necessarily always write it on my own. I need to make that clear. I always do it in collaboration with others because it's really important, right?
Yeah.
To collaborate and have different voices and perspectives and even uplift different experiences. A lot of times I'm analyzing policy, both from like the international to the federal to the local, statewide to the hyper local city, county. So it really depends on like what's coming our way. I would say at YUCCA, we really focus a lot on like state policy and sometimes county policy. So, one of the initiatives that I first walked into was like the health equity and environmental impacts policy that was proposed in the city of Albuquerque. So that meant like, okay, what's YUCCA's stance when it comes to cumulative impacts and air pollution and air quality? So then establishing those stances, having conversation with our membership, our steering committee, our staff about what it is that we want to emphasize as being a part of a stance and what it is that we want to make it explicitly clear to decision makers, whether that's taking an action or asking them to change a certain action. And so like day to day, it kind of like varies.
Yeah.
I would say my day to day varies drastically sometimes. Sometimes I'm in meetings quite literally 8 hours a day. And it's in different coalition spaces, it's with staff, it's with members, or it's with like, focusing on the development of a young person as a leader, right? Supporting them in those initiatives. Sometimes it looks like going to official government proceedings, going to hearings, or going to stakeholder meetings, giving an input and perspective of YUCCA stance. And sometimes it's very easy, chill day where I'm getting the opportunity to read and write. I consider those chill, easy days.
Yeah.
and sometimes talking to legislators. It depends on the season. It
Mhm.
changes per the season, I would say.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Zoe?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Zoe. I use she, her pronouns. I'm 23. I actually just started with Yucca back in January, so about like 6, 7 months ago now. And I'm Yucca's communications manager. And so I feel like my role, to try to like sum it up, I feel like is trying to thread the needle between all of the different areas of our work, right? So the policy work that Ennedith does with our steering committee and with like our coalitions, and the like organizing and base building work that we're doing, as well as the direct actions and protests that we're having. And I think one of the things we've also really tried to emphasize lately is also threading the needle across movements, right? So, how our work, kind of where our work is positioned in the context of the larger movement for social change that we're a part of, especially when we're talking about a lot of what we're seeing lately with the genocide in Palestine, with the protests that we're seeing in Los Angeles, things like that, trying to really build that narrative for folks around how all of these issues are really intertwined together too, and our struggles really are not separate from each other. And I think similarly too, I think my work shifts a lot on a day-to-day basis, but some of the main things I take on are Yucca's like social media presence, so our Instagram and our TikToks. And then we also send out like weekly e-blasts to a lot of our subscribers. So I do that writing too. And then kind of our online presence in general in terms of our website and things like that. And I also think other times it can look like a lot more interaction with like the media and members of the press. So trying to build Yucca's profile and bring attention to the work that we're doing, but also really trying to, alongside our steering committee and the youth that are really driving this work, really make sure that their voices and perspectives and leadership is really at the forefront of what we're trying to build. And so I think my day to day really varies. Some days
Yeah.
it's like Ennedith was saying, it's super chill and I can sit around and like make graphics all day for our social media. And some days it's a lot of like speech writing and kind of longer term narrative building. But yeah, it's been really great.
Yeah. Can you guys both talk a little bit about how you go about uplifting youth voices through through your work? Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, on my end, I think one of the things that I've been trying to help build out for us as an organization is the tools to also help folks feel comfortable telling their stories, right? Knowing that in so many of the spaces we go into, especially thinking about like policy spaces, right? These are spaces where our voices have not historically and are still not really centered and included, and helping folks kind of meet everyone where they're at in terms of comfortability, and making sure that also folks are understanding, right, how their story is a really essential part of how we message to folks on why these issues matter to them, on not just on an abstract level, but on a day-to-day basis as well, and like the real world impacts that folks here in New Mexico are seeing in their lives, especially our generation. I think more specifically, right, like we do a lot of video content for social media, and so we try to do that really alongside our steering committee members, our staff. Sometimes in our e-blasts, we try to kind of feature the work of our steering committee members and highlight different actions that are coming up for folks to get involved in. But really, I think it's about giving folks the space to tell those stories, and reminding folks too that is impactful on its own, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say a lot of the policy work does go hand in hand with comms and building out that narrative. Um, in terms of like my direct engagement, a lot of times it's organizing people for public comment.
Yeah.
Especially in like government proceedings, whether that's a legislature and a county hearing, a city council meeting. No matter what, people do need some prepping beforehand. Like they need to better understand the issue. So a lot of times I'll break down the problem that we're seeing so it's digestible to the public or to like our members. Sometimes it means developing talking points or working in coalition spaces with talking points that like, maybe there's things we need to emphasize about this
Yeah.
problem. And a lot of times it's really talking the issues through with our members. Sometimes they'll be like, I'm concerned about this. And I'm like, you know what? You should tell the policymakers about that
Mhm.
concern, or I'm worried about this, or I've had this experience. So a lot of time it's centering and uplifting their experiences, their stories, or even their ideas and thoughts. Because a
Mhm.
lot of times, sometimes public comment can end up being a little on the
Mhm.
downside, because there's negative impacts when it comes to an unregulated industry like the fossil fuel industry. And a lot of times there's people who have really great ideas for their community that need to be said and documented and put in the record because, that's how you center a youth
Mhm.
perspective, a youth voice. So it's really a lot of building that narrative alongside Zoe and helping young people find in what ways that their experiences can inform the narrative or could even guide the direction of that.
Yeah. Could you speak a little more on why policy is such an important piece in like the larger puzzle of climate and social justice activism?
Yeah, I would say policy is a huge piece of the puzzle because of
Mhm.
regulations, because of impact to both public health and access to a healthy, sustainable, full-blown environment.
Mhm.
And then two, because accountability. I really want to zone in on accountability, especially when it comes to the environment, when it comes to climate. Um, because of the way that New Mexico is structured economically, we are extremely dependent on the fossil fuel industry for our state revenue, um, making up, I think, 50% of our state revenue that funds public programs. And the things is that that is not by accident. That's an intentional policy choice. That's a policy choice that was made hundreds of years ago. And right now, what we're asking is accountability in the sense that people have seen their communities actively polluted when it comes to the land, when it comes to the water, when it comes to the air. Oil spills in your backyard are not a normal thing. And if we continue to allow industries to just get away with that, what's going to make them stop it, right? That's where regulation comes into place. And regulation is determined by policy. And so a lot of times, policy is a way to hold bad actors accountable. It's also a way to potentially find the resources to build something new. Um, I would say at Yucca, we've always been, at least in my 2 years at Yucca, we've been on the defense a lot. So it's always like, no, like, oh, no, you need to consult these groups, or hey, you need to consult us in this way, or this process isn't working for communities because it's true. A lot of times policy initiatives require some type of community consultation. And and with that community consultation, it's one of the only ways that people really get to speak their truth sometimes, whether that's saying no to a project or saying, like, "Maybe this could work, but it would work have to address this and this and this." And so, I feel if you are a climate and environmental justice organization, having some type of policy engagement, whether that's teaching the general public how to engage with policy decisions or actively becoming a player in a rulemaking,
Mhm.
it's really important because it tries to balance out the inequity that
Mhm.
we already see when it comes to environmental and climate policy. Um, and one of the biggest examples that I like to use is like thinking of the placement of wasteful facilities, like facilities where waste might be going to. Is that in a place where it's like a historically marginalized community, a historically Black, Hispanic, Asian community? Is that where that's being placed? And in what ways are they being impacted because it's in their backyard?
Mhm.
You know, policy is important in the sense of being able to hold bad actors accountable and try to put some type of investment into the future
Mhm.
of what that accountability might look like or what is needed.
Yeah, awesome. Um, would you be able to talk a little bit about how you got involved with Yucca and what your background is, like why you're so passionate about this? What are your roots and how did that lead you here?
Yeah, so I first got involved with Yucca 2 years ago. I would say formally as a staff person.
Mhm.
I was doing like an air quality toolkit at another internship at one of, a leading environmental legal center here in New Mexico. And so we had a partnership with Earth Care, and my job was pretty much to do the research of air quality monitoring, specifically citizen science, as in people buy air monitors to see, what the pollution might be within their homes or even outside their homes, and trying to break down all the information available on the EPA website and making essentially like a guidebook in case anyone in whichever community they're in could just buy an air monitor and start tracking that stuff for themselves. And the reason I was doing that is because in Santa Fe, there's only one air quality monitor for the entire town. And I think it might be one of the few handful in all of northern New Mexico. And Earth Care is situated in a already marginalized community, the south side of Santa Fe. And they are situated like right next to an asphalt plant that was causing a ton of health issues for community members and also polluting their air. So that was the initial thing that got me introduced to Earth Care. And in all honesty, I was looking for a job and it just
Yeah.
kind of worked that Yucca was looking for a policy person. And I had already had some type of policy research background because I did a fellowship in DC. And it was exactly what I was looking for, being able to hold down really hard lines and have a really radical, I wouldn't even say radical, but, to the rest of the world, radical stances and being able to work within those threads without compromising things was really important. But prior to Yucca, I already had done plenty of community organizing and immigration spaces or in terms of like food access or education access. And so naturally just kept applying to youth focused programs and somehow got lucky enough to land at Yucca.
Could you say more about, and Zoe, if you have input here too, why is it so important to not compromise on certain things when fighting this fight?
I think it's important to remember that sometimes when it comes to the policy space, the voices that are being directly impacted aren't in the room. And so when there is compromises or negotiations or trade-offs that are being made in these policy decision spaces, it's not just going to impact the one person that's making the negotiation or who's willing to compromise. It's going to impact entire populations from quite literally human beings to the plants and the animals. And so when it comes to environment and the climate space, I will admit it's been a challenging space to be in, especially as a young woman of color, because some people really don't value that perspective or they don't value um, your life experience. And so when these trade-offs and these compromises are happening, that's not at the top of people's mind. And it's important to hold down hard lines because at least for me, the negotiations isn't just a simple negotiation that's going to be written down on paper. It's going to have a material impact for years, decades, or generations to come. And once that negotiation is made and that's the agreement that folks are coming to, it may actually result in more inequity, more environmental racism, more disproportionate impacts rather than actually improving the situation at hand the way we see it right now.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about the policy front too, I think we've seen so many times where this kind of really impactful legislation that starts out in a way that would make a material difference for our communities, right, if it was put into practice, is then like watered down in a way that we see like legislators, right, are using this kind of legislation as a talking point when in reality, it's not doing much to help our communities anymore. And I think something we also always talk about at Yucca is that we're also trying to build something. We're not just trying to say no to all of these things. We're also trying to build something better. So when we think about, I think, how we can try to do that and do that within this system that we're navigating that is inherently harmful, I think it's also on us to like think big and dream big about what is possible within that. Because yeah, when we make these compromises, the folks getting impacted are our communities, the ones that whose perspectives already haven't been valued in these spaces for years and years. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And then, yeah, Zoe, so why is communication and social media such an important piece in the puzzle? Because with this series, I'm kind of trying to frame the larger puzzle of all of the things that go into this activism. So like, why is communicating this information to people so important?
Yeah, so I think kind of building off of what Ennedith was saying too, I think being in New Mexico, we're also in a particularly interesting position where we are living in one of the most extractive states in the nation in terms of our kind of economic mix and the ways that our state is so reliant on oil and gas and industry. And I think we've seen that play out in ways that have really influenced like our culture and the way that folks see industry in the state. So from things like, right, the state fair and balloon fiesta, having, oil and gas companies as sponsors, all the way to, right, in some areas of the state, we're seeing oil and gas and industry go into schools and fund resources all the way down to kindergartners, right? And so from a very young age, young people in our state are getting this messaging, right? That oil and gas is something that will provide jobs, that is providing stability to the state. And so when I think about the big picture in terms of our communications work, it's also really about countering that dominant narrative that we see over and over again that our communities who are experiencing the impacts of this kind of pollution and environmental devastation already know not to be true, but also helping folks to see the alternatives that are possible as well. I think one critique that I hear a lot of the climate and environmental justice movement as a whole is, right, like you all, reject all of these like ideas for things, but you all don't have real solutions instead. And I think it's also about helping people understand what is truly possible, whether that's through, right, actually like meaningful, tangible legislative change, or whether that's through community gardens or whether that's through protest and direct action. Um, and so I think that we have a number of different ways we like approach that. But I also think the other big piece is meeting folks where they're at in terms of education. I know that sometimes we'll do like deep dives into topics that maybe folks who are newer to like climate and environmental spaces maybe wouldn't have heard about before. But I think we also try to provide pathways for folks to get involved in our work through communications. And I think why I kind of how I view our communications as a whole for Yucca, if it's working correctly, right, it should be helping to uplift and also strengthen all of the other areas of our work in terms of giving folks direct ways that they can actually engage right off the bat from wherever they're at in terms of education and kind of political activation and knowledge. So I would say those are a couple ways that we can really try to engage folks from all across the huge spectrum of our communities across the state. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Would you be able to talk a little bit about your journey to Yucca, your roots? I know that you're not originally from New Mexico, so how did you end up here? And specifically, what motivates you so much to fight for change in this community specifically?
Yeah, definitely. So I didn't initially grow up in New Mexico. I actually grew up in a really small town in rural Tennessee. My parents were both professors at like a university there, but my dad actually grew up in Albuquerque. And so my family had always wanted to move back to the state. So we ended up moving back to Albuquerque when I was in like my going into my junior year of high school. And so I finished up high school here in Albuquerque, and within like the first 6 months of getting here, I became very activated around community organizing work in a way that honestly
I hadn't had the opportunity to in the past. I think that's one of the differences I've seen in living here versus, rural areas in the South,
Yeah.
right? In terms of the networks that have already been built and kind of the organizing infrastructure that already exists to get plugged into. So actually, one of our other staff members initially pulled me into work around like gun violence prevention and gun violence policy work right around, March for Our Lives. And so he and I and like a coalition of other student organizers were working for a while on March for Our Lives Albuquerque and co-organizing that. And we actually, I think that was one of the first points where I really began to understand too, that some of the kind of policy solutions and suggestions we were seeing around like gun violence, for example, in other areas of the country weren't necessarily solutions that we saw as real solutions here in New Mexico. Something we talked a lot about around that was like a lot of gun violence here in New Mexico looks like state violence from the police. And that's something we didn't see reflected in the national platform that we were following. So we actually took that work from that march and formed another organization called Fight for Our Lives. And so myself and Johnny, who is that other staff member, organized there together for multiple years. And that work was also really focused on student-led organizing and efforts and really trying to also just build up folks' political education and training around how to mobilize our communities. A lot of the same work that YUCCA is doing. And so during that time too was kind of on the tail end of that was when YUCCA's work was starting with the global climate strike. And I remember that we had actually partnered with YUCCA on some of, the big events that were going on around that. And from there, I went into around the time that COVID hit, doing some more kind of electoral work. So I was actually in school at UNM when COVID started. I was just finishing up my freshman year and we went completely virtual. And so I suddenly had like all this space in my schedule to kind of take on other opportunities. So I did some work with Albuquerque Mutual Aid pretty heavily during that time. But also it gave me room to do some more work around like different congressional campaigns that were going on. And that's work that I continued for a few years. I had like a little stint at a like national nonprofit doing some like basic needs work, actually in a policy role, which is what led me to discover I didn't know if I could handle the policy spaces consistently. So I kind of after that was looking for a new role, and Johnny, the one who I had organized with for all those years, actually kind of pulled me back in because YUCCA was looking for someone for comms. So like Ennedith, it's like the timing just kind of worked out perfectly for me to end up here.
Yeah, and we're so glad that it did. Okay, could you talk a little bit more about, I guess, two things. One, if youth in the community, someone in high school in Albuquerque, how could they start to get involved in different things like that? I know you were lucky enough to have a classmate, a friend that pulled you into that, but if they don't really know anyone, where do they start looking to get involved? And then also, Yucca isn't currently hiring for your position because you're in the position, but how could someone out of college, out of high school, go about like finding a job like yours, and sort of what could they expect from job searching or just searching for community in general?
Yeah, definitely. So I think in terms of like organizing and getting involved as a student and a young person, I think if you don't have right friends that are like already engaged in the work, I really encourage folks to like pick an issue you're most passionate about and find an organization locally to your area that's already doing that work. Because I think as much as autonomous organizing also we know is a really great tool, these organizations that have been doing this work for years have so many resources in terms of getting folks politically educated and trained up on like best practices and kind of how we move through this work. And I would say that, with YUCCA, for example, we're constantly looking for new members and folks to join our work. We do like weekly member meetings that are virtual for folks all across the state where we can start to bring folks in the ways that they're most interested in engaging. So that would be my like first suggestion. I think also, if folks are having trouble like finding an organization to join or getting involved, I think sometimes, especially right now, all of the protests that are going on too can be some really great entry points. A lot of times the folks hosting those are the more established like organizations in the local area. And so going to those and kind of chatting with folks about how you might be able to get consistently involved in the long-term organizing work that they're doing, I think is another great kind of way in. In terms of a position like mine, I feel like how I came into like the communications work specifically is actually always really kind of funny to me because the first electoral campaign I was working on was actually being like managed by one of my close friends at the time. And he actually just was like, okay, we're going to put you in a communications role and we're going to see how you do. And from there, I just ended up continuing that on. But I think, I went to school for political science. I know a lot of folks, do communications degrees that are interested in doing this comms work, but I would say, I don't think there's like a specific degree that's most useful in this kind of work. I think the more knowledge you could have about a variety of topics, especially in relation to the issues you're like most interested in engaging on, right, is super, super useful. And I think, again, it's about like growing into this kind of a role too and starting to take the intentional time to do the education with yourself around the issues and kind of, establish yourself with your local organizers and organizations. And I think in terms of looking for positions like this, what's always been the most helpful to me is honestly just the network that I've built. And I mean that like in a professional sense, but also just in terms of the community relationships that I've formed over time. So I think it's also talking to your friends and your neighbors and building a community with people outside of professional and workspaces too. That has actually ended up giving me so many of the opportunities that I've gotten that I don't think I would have been able to kind of land otherwise too.
So you said that there's not really a specific degree for your role. Is there a specific skill set though? Like if I know you do a lot of like building social media posts, taking a lot of photos at events, like are there certain things that would be maybe appealing to somebody or someone maybe if they're thinking about this role, what are some warnings or maybe some things that you have to do every day that not everyone might be up for?
Yeah, so I would say every communications role that I've been in terms of warnings, has just been you also have to recognize that in some ways your work is moving with the news cycle, especially roles that are more press focused. So, in some ways, you don't end up with a whole lot of time where you're just completely off. If
Yeah.
something happens in the world, chances are you're going to be the one needing to kind of respond to that. And I think sometimes that can be heavy in terms of feeling like, okay, I don't have the actual space to just completely unplug for any length of time, really. But I think in terms of skill sets, I think what's cool about communications is there's so many different areas of the work that folks can focus on. So my role with Yucca kind of goes across, right? Like photography, social media, like speech writing and things like that, more of engagement with the press. But I think there's also a lot of roles that folks can take on that are very specific to each piece of that, too. I know a lot of organizations have a dedicated just social media manager, for example. And, as those teams get built out, I think there's a lot of room for folks to take on what you're most passionate about. I think a misconception people have sometimes with communications work is that you have to really love writing or be an incredible writer. And I think that can be a piece of the work for sure, depending on the role. But so much of it, right, is about seeing like the big picture narrative and figuring out how can I support the other folks that are working around me? Because I do think this role very much interfaces with like every single person on the team to really help them build out the messaging and the narrative strategy around their work in a way that fits together cohesively. So I would say like big picture thinkers also I think would be great for roles like this. But yeah, I mean, I see like, oh my gosh, even like high schoolers today, I look at like I'm on TikTok scrolling and I'm like, oh my gosh, all of these people could do my job so easily. So I think folks have more skills than they realize sometimes. And if there's one of those pieces you're like passionate about, I think there's definitely a role you can find. Yeah.
So thank you. And then Ennedith, I'm sad to say you are leaving your role at Yucca. We're gonna miss you a lot, but so everybody knows, Yucca is looking to hire another full-time staff member to fill your role. How could someone go about applying to that job? What could they expect? And then similar to the question with Zoe, what skill sets does it require? What might you not expect from the role? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I would say if like a young person is interested in policy work, it's really versatile. There's not a one size fits all to do policy work. It depends on so many different things. I will say it's a very people focused job.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're a little shy, which I'll admit, when I was a kid back in high school, I was very much a shy person, then you might have to get comfortable in being in uncomfortable situations.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of a skill set, I would say like for any young person that wants to do policy work, the skill set varies,
Yeah.
right? Like it varies from being able to cultivate a narrative to being able to talk to people and create a comfortable enough situation where they can be fully honest of what it is that they're experiencing to potentially learning how to analyze things. And I will say is that sometimes I have to look things up
Yeah.
or ask one of our partner attorneys, like, what is the heck does this mean? Right. Um, but also being comfortable with not knowing everything. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's so important for policy work because people expect you to be an expert in anything and everything. But the thing is that there's always an opportunity to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say, I don't think I envisioned myself as a young person doing policy work a few years ago. It kind of happened in the interest that I wanted to do research work. In college, I did a degree in international studies and Spanish. So I learned a lot about human rights, how human rights and those agreements were established, and how it is that we see it and should see it in our play out in our day to day lives. And so my focus was really writing critiques.
Mm-hmm.
I would critique so many things in history, policy decisions in history, specifically around immigration and gender. That is what I've zoned in on. My capstone was on feminicidios, so femicides in Mexico, and the movements that feminists were building up to address that issue. Because even though we are in New Mexico, I think there's a parallel between the missing murder indigenous women movement here in New Mexico and Ni Una Más in Latin America, right? And so that intrigued me in a way. I was like, what are these parallels? What are these feminists calling for, right? So I did an entire research on that. I wrote papers on it. And so I would say, like, also learning to build out those people skills in high school, especially um, the school that I went to Highland High School in the International District. We were a low funded school.
Mm-hmm.
We had books from the 90s. We had amazing teachers who did what they can with the resources that they had. And, a lot of my classmates themselves were either homeless, didn't have homes, were living on people's couches, didn't have food, didn't have clothes, right? So I learned to organize around those things. In what ways can we support our friends, our literal friends, our neighbors, right? And so learning in what ways to become resourceful, I think is the
Yeah.
biggest thing. And that's always a question when it comes to policy. Where's the resource coming from? Where's the money coming from?
Mhm.
Right. But it's like people in the hood have to be resourceful to survive. So I've done that for my entire life. And being able to translate that lived experience to the policy work has been really powerful. In my degree, I did not only did I do research, but I learned how to conceptualize a lot of my experiences growing up. And I learned as to why it is that we had to go through that, or why it is that that was the situations that a lot of us were in. And also, like, I think it's really important to know your history in policy. For those who may not like history, I'm sorry, but you're going to make stupid decisions. And we already see it play out as it is. It's important to know your history on a certain issue, on a movement. If you want to join a movement, read the history. Who started this movement? Why did they start it? What are the foundations that they've built that I can continue to build on? And also principles. Like in policy, you somewhat have to be, I wouldn't say an extrovert, but a people person. And it's really easy for someone to train themselves to be a people person, but be a principled people person. Just because the oil and gas guy, policy guy is a really cool, has a really cool personality, maybe we should question what it is that he's doing for his day to day life, for his job, you know? Maybe we should hold that person accountable for doing what it is that they decided to do. Be a principled policy person.
Yeah.
Don't compromise your principles for the sake of being in a space or even simply being in a decision-making space. And in terms of applying to my role, we are just honestly asking for a cover letter and a resume and asking that it be emailed to yucca@earthcarenm.org. And I more than likely will be the person interviewing you,
Nice.
having that conversation with you because we want to make sure that the next person who takes on this role, and I've done this very intentionally, if I'm being honest, I am aging out of Yucca. I feel like I've given a lot of my youth to movement work. And of course, that's not going to stop outside of an organization or institution that I might be a part of. But, I think it's important to continue that legacy of training up young people to take on these roles and to carry them out. So that's the decision I've made is to give an opportunity for another young person to dictate what the Yucca policy work is going to look like in the future. Because I'm in my mid 20s, but I'm pushing towards late 20s. And, my perspective and reasoning is changing a little bit. And I think in order for this to be like a youth space, I'm still a young person, but like a true youth space, we need to have those young perspectives. I talk to high school students now, and sometimes I'm like, interesting, but I'm like, that's actually a really badass vision. You should have the opportunity and the resources to execute that. So, I will say this is a full-time commitment. So the expectation is that you do this work in honesty, with transparency, being open to criticism, and being open to accountability, or whether that's you holding yourself accountable or, might be a partner, might be a coworker, might be a member, being open to that accountability. Because I know, like, if I'm being fully honest, in the policy world, I'm surrounded by people with really big inflated egos. And sometimes that dictates their negotiation, that dictates the policy that they're putting forth. Don't let your ego dictate Yucca's policy work. Please, I am asking that. This is policy work that you're doing on behalf of a movement that has been trusted onto you, that you have been trusted with. And so I'm just always going to remind people to be principled, that you don't have to know everything. It's a learning process, being patient with yourself, building those skills little by little, learning how to analyze things with critiques that may improve it or simply critiques that, hey, this is not going to work. And explicitly stating that. It's important to state, hey, this is a no for us. And boldly claiming that no, and standing true to your power, standing in your power. I think that's so important. You're going to be surrounded by people that are going to try to belittle you, that are going to claim that you're only doing this for the press hits or a little, media catching point. But no, like Yucca is intentionally looking for a policy person that is going to hold down these hard lines and stick to them without compromises. I personally, I will say, out of a professional space, I am not a very extroverted person. I'm very much to myself. But, cultivate a personality to build those relationships, to being open to meeting new and different people from across the board. And you will be okay. Like just being honest, being transparent, open to change, and open to critique and accountability is just really critical.
Awesome. I think something that I've learned a lot today is that neither of your roles at Yucca are sitting at your computer alone, right? It's all working with people, getting out there, and like you both have said, being a people person, being compassionate, knowing your history, setting hard boundaries. Like this is all important, and these are the people that we need in these spaces. But yeah, I mean, I'm glad that we're doing these staff highlights so we can show people like behind the scenes of Yucca what you guys are actually doing every day and like what hard work goes into this because yeah, I think sometimes people take for granted like how much it takes from you even though you're getting paid to do this work but it's important to you and it takes a lot out of you, and we need more people involved in this, right? So, segueing kind of that into my next question for you guys, from each of your perspectives, like how could people most engage in Yucca and get involved in the movement, whether that's climate justice, gun violence, immigration, etc. Like how, from your personal perspective, can people most get involved and like help out with these things? We need more people, right? Yeah.
I mean, for me, for Yucca specifically, I would say there are a couple ways for folks to get involved, like as new members. So, on our like social media accounts, we always have linked in our bio. We have a little like member intake form that we ask folks to fill out who are interested in joining us, just with some basic information about yourself and also why you're interested in the work. And from there, we have a member of our team call you and give you kind of a one-on-one rundown of what the work looks like and learn a little bit more about just the areas that you're most interested in. And from there, you can start attending. We have those weekly member meetings that I mentioned. And yeah, it's great to have folks come to those consistently because I think that's where we can really start to plug folks into, what they're most interested in, whether that's the policy work, whether that's the communications and like social media piece of things, or whether that's helping to like organize protests and events, or engaging with some of our partners too. And then I would say, other than that, too, we also have other like events and actions that are open to the public pretty often that we also put out specific calls for support for. So I would just say also, if you see one of those go up on like our website or our social media, definitely come join us. And if you're interested in getting involved with the work long term, any of us are always glad to chat more about kind of what that looks like and how we can really shape your role with the organization to look like what you want it to be. So that's what I would say specifically to Yucca. And then for organizing more generally, I would say, and I feel like we've said this in so many podcast episodes recently, but it is really getting to know your neighbors, building community. I think that that is what will let you engage in not just the climate justice work. And if that is the area that you're most interested in, to engage in it from a lens of understanding, right, all of the other issues that are intertwined with it, and really allowing that to inform your work. And yeah, showing up for one another. I mean, this is a heavy time for folks right now in so many communities in so many different ways. And I think what we really need from each other right now is not just symbolic action, right? But how we're showing up for each other day to day in the streets during a protest, but also like, are we making each other dinner? Are we taking time to get to know each other? And I think it can be as simple as that too.
Yeah, I think Zoe touched on the yucca aspect really good,
Yeah.
and you've even touched in ways to get involved outside of the organization. And I would just like to reiterate, right? Because yucca is very focused on young people. Is like joining a student group is a really good way to get involved in many instances. I had done Mecha, el Movimiento Estudiantil Chicanos de Aztlán, in high school, and that's how I learned about mutual aid. That's how I learned about movement history. Talking to a trusted adult in your life, like, hey, in what ways can I do something better to serve our community? Or even just a friend, a colleague, a neighbor, like you mentioned, and potentially reaching out to an organization that you're interested in and seeing if they have either paid internship opportunities, volunteer opportunities, or if they may need support with a certain project. Don't be scared to reach out. I know plenty of our partners, plenty of organizations across the state want the help, need the help, and are more than happy to accommodate you and to bring you into these spaces so that you can learn. I would also say if you're like a writer, an artist, a creative, or if, like you're a scientist, you're an engineer, like seeing in what ways can your skill set, your knowledge base serve as an asset to communities? And what ways can you translate that from just simply being a job for you to being of service to the general needs of the people around you? And like Zoe said, taking care of each other,
Yeah.
taking care of your homies, taking care of yourself. It's really important. And I am always going to emphasize that is self-care. Knowing what it is when you might be pushing a boundary, or knowing if your energy's too low and you can't commit to that, be honest. Be honest. That's how we create really powerful communities, is having the opportunity to both step in and do really powerful work, and also taking a step back when we feel the need to, and having that support to do it.
Yeah. I really like your point that even if you're an engineer, a doctor, etc., like any role you have, a barista, like you have skill sets and you can help the community, and self-care as well as community care, right? Like help caring for each other, leaning on people when you don't have capacity, and letting people lean on you when you do have capacity, and just like, yeah, open and honest communication about all of that too. Yeah. Do either of you guys have any specific work you're doing outside of YUCCA, any orgs you want to shout out and mention to people, or just in general, anything else you want to add before we wrap it up here today?
So, I mean, I would say on my end, the main organization outside of like the climate justice specific work that I would really encourage folks to get involved with is Albuquerque Mutual Aid, which I know I mentioned a little bit, a little bit earlier, but we started during COVID back in 2020 from and the idea behind it, right, is it's a by the community for the community effort where folks to this day, right, are packaging care packages for our families and literally going and delivering them to their houses in a lot of cases, really trying to meet folks' basic needs in that way. And I think with some of the conditions that we're starting to see too, I think that can become useful to our families and our communities in a number of ways, again. And then, outside of YUCCA, the other kind of organization I do some more autonomous work with a little bit is Southwest Solidarity Network, which is kind of what came out of Fight for Our Lives, as we all kind of transitioned into, out of high school and into other roles. So we, mostly do support for direct actions and kind of really helping to build hopefully a network of organizations across movements that are ready to kind of jump in when we're seeing these conditions happen. And so would encourage you all to give them a follow as well, and keep track of their work. Yeah.
I would say that I am helping a former employer with like building their student curriculum for their internship and kind of providing feedback and guidance. So there's like different ways to engage. I'll admit I don't have much time to do work outside of Yucca.
Yeah.
So Yucca has been my entire world the past 2 years, and it's been amazing. It's been a really great experience, and I've learned and grown so much. But like, there's different ways to engage. I sometimes will spend time explaining and breaking things down to friends, family, or even like a stranger who might ask me, "What do you do?" And then the conversation just kind of follows through. I'm hoping to engage with ABQ Mutual Aid, write more op-eds or like personal manifestos or document my own life. And also just being intentional and learning about New Mexico. That's what I'm trying to do. Is I want to learn about the different communities that are here, the history and the people that live there. So I'm hoping to be able to take on that journey in the next few years.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for coming on to the Yapping with Yucca podcast and talking about your roles and taking time out of your busy work days. I know you guys have another meeting after this. So yeah, just thank you guys so much. And to the audience, please like and subscribe to our podcast. We have it on Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube. We're trying to get on a regular release schedule. So please put notifications on for us so you don't miss an episode. And yeah, everybody have a fantastic day. Thank you so much. Bye.